I fear that one does not catch a vampire. Welcome to my dojo. This is Kung Fu Pizza Party, and I'm your host, Brandon Knight. And today I am joined by author and podcaster Christian Ashley to review The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. Christian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brandon. I have been hyped for this ever since you first said you were going to do it like months ago. I get to talk about a very goofy movie that I is very near and dear to my heart.
I am excited to poke your brain a little bit about that part because you are right, listeners. He's right. I told Christian about this show months ago. It may have even been the summer, like as I'm first starting to put this all together. And I was like, is that something you would be interested in? And immediately he said, yes. And I want to do this movie. And keep in mind, at that point in time, and I do mean every single Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, Jet Li, Chuck Norris, Donnie Yen, Tony Jaa, Jean-Claude Van Damme, even Steven Seagal movie was on the table. All the Karate Kids, Enter the Dragon, Drunken Master. Christian wants to talk about the one Kung Fu movie starring freaking Peter Cushing. And I can't tell if I'm mad or insanely impressed that you came up with this option. So you know what? Actually, before we get to why this movie is so near and dear to you, I do want to take a moment. So, you are the host of several podcasts here on the Anazao Ministries podcast network. We give Josh a hard time for the amount of shows he has, but you've got quite a few too. Tell our listeners a little bit about your show, Why I Don't Like.
Yeah, that one is a little bit on a hiatus right now with classes and everything. But the general premise is there are certain things out there that I've watched and I really don't like. I am currently going through different genres. I'm starting with anime, and I'm starting with Mushoku Tensei, which is an isekai story and has very terrible representation of women and has one of the worst main characters of all time in the story, who has very little growth throughout the series. So I go through it systematically, not intentional pun there. We'll get to that later. Just going through episode by episode, things I like, things I don't like, things how I think it can improve itself, and yeah.
I I really like that concept, especially because here, another show that you are a host of, you're on Systematic Geekology, where the general premise of that podcast is everything's great and awesome. Everything it's like that. It's like in the Lego movie. Everything is awesome. Like Systematic Geekology is very pro everything. You're the counterbalance of, well, actually, not everything is perfect and great. But it sounds like this movie would not be an episode of Why I Don't Like. Apparently you love this movie. Tell us why, Christian.
Not for the right reasons. Not because it's a good movie. I like this because of the crossover we get here and this insane idea of hammer horror, which is something that I really love watching. Your Draculas, your Frankensteins, so on and so forth, and all the other films that they did. Just building off of the Universal monsters and doing their own spin on things. And then you have Peter Cushing, who's been Van Helsing for like 20 plus times in these films, going into China to fight vampires there with a bunch of martial artists and Dracula. Like, what is there not to love about that stupid premise?
This movie is indeed this is like the ideal late night Saturday night horror movie
Yes.
or like a drive-in movie kind of scenario, because you're right, this is just an insane premise. Van Helsing, Peter Cushing, who always looks old. I have yet to see him in a movie where he actually looks young. He's always ancient. um
Yes.
going up against going up against vampires, kind of a variation of the Jiangxi. We'll get into that later on. We talked about that a couple episodes ago. But
Hmm.
I guess this segues well into our producer Cooper's here as well, listeners. I guess this segues well into our martial art cinema history lesson for the episode, because
Yes.
as Christian alluded to earlier, this is a joint production between Hammer Films and the Shaw Brothers. Hammer was the British alternative to Universal by way of horror movies. And the Shaw Brothers, of course, were one of the two biggest movie producers in Hong Kong, putting out martial art or putting out kung fu movies right alongside Golden Harvest. Which I got to give it to Hammer. If you're going to make a movie that is going to be very heavily martial art and Asian, good for them not to phone it in and have a lot of misrepresentation, but to actually bring in people who could represent the genre well.
Yes. This is a completely and utterly bonkers movie in the idea of how the heck this works out. You have two things that you would never expect to cross over, and yet it doesn't really work together that well at times, but it's just what you're watching, just accept it. Just turn your brain off and enjoy. And I very rarely say that about films because I'm typically more snobby and like, there's got to be a purpose behind stuff that I'm watching, but for this one, it just gets me. I like to see uh Peter Cushing trying to murder vampires, and I like to see people use martial arts and beat each other up. Like that's all I need. I don't need Citizen Kane in this form. I just need what is happening on this screen.
And the plot of this movie I wish was as simple as that. It's a little weird. The movie opens with an Asian man coming to Dracula to resurrect the seven golden vampires. And Dracula says, "You know what? I have a better idea. I'm going to go back as you and resurrect the seven golden vampires." And this seven golden vampires is like this ancient curse that was put on a village of these vampires who are just in a constant state of terrorizing this one particular village. By the way, the village killed one of the vampires originally. So even though the movie is called Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, there's only six. I guess six doesn't sound as threatening as seven. In the meantime, Peter Cushing, playing our hero, Van Helsing, is in a region of China doing research on vampires. And wouldn't you know, he's at this university giving a lecture, and one of the people who's from that village is there to get him to come take down the seven golden vampires and ultimately find out that Dracula is still there, which leads us to a big showdown between Van Helsing and Dracula. Christian, are there any other highlights you want to give us from this film from your memory?
Yeah, we've got our ragtag team of martial artists. Is it six brothers and a sister or something like that? It's been a while since I watched the movie. I did not have time to prep for this one with classes and everything. But just like their interactions with Van Helsing are uh, I don't know how to put that in the words. Interesting, should I put it?
Interesting works. I believe it's seven brothers and a sister because that's a typical trope you see in these movies. So I think it's seven brothers and a sister. I don't know why it's always that, but go on.
Yeah, and just their whole thing with the actually fighting the six, not seven vampires in question. And unfortunately, is it the sister who ends up becoming a vampire after she gets bitten?
Yeah, I
Or,
think in the end, it's just about everybody gets turned into a
yes.
vampire in the end. The sister has a very dramatic scene. Yeah, it is. I was very like, oh my gosh, we're going all in here. It reminded me of
Yes.
the end fight scene in Army of Darkness when they're fighting all the Deadites in the medieval place. It's just carnage everywhere.
Absolute. And I mean, at the very end, like Dracula is killed again for the last time, again by Peter Cushing Van Helsing. And actually for good, because I'm pretty sure this is what kind of killed Hammer Horror to an extent, at least on the Dracula side of things, due to many factors, including a bad box office and the fact that at this point in time, Peter Cushing was reeling from the death of his wife. He was trying to like go on a vacation somewhere and film and try and get his mind off of things, and that caused some friction with people. And of course, the Shaw brothers didn't like how the Hammer horror people were doing things. They didn't like how they did things. It's a huge, giant mess, and somehow we got a movie from it.
A movie that is, by the way, listeners, incredibly accessible. I found this movie on YouTube for free.
Yep.
It's there. So I will definitely throw a link in the description of this episode for you all to go check it out. But yeah, it was my understanding, again, kind of going back to our cinema history lesson, my understanding is this movie is like 90% Hammer, and then the Shaw brothers did like the martial arts sequences essentially, but still, even at that, the British actors didn't like the Asian actors. The Asian actors didn't like the British actors. And it's just, yeah. Apparently, it was a hot mess behind the scenes, but you get a pretty decent movie out of it. Like you said, it's not Citizen Kane, nor did I expect that. Like, you got to know what you're getting yourself into based off of that name. But it's watchable. And when it comes to 70s horror, especially, there's plenty unwatchable movies out there.
Oh, most definitely. There's not even enough time to count them all. But this one does its job effectively enough, and as we've mentioned, like it's a huge body count by the end. That's doesn't really come out of left field, but it's enough to be shocking in a good way.
Let's talk a little bit about that body count. Let's talk about the combat in this movie a little bit. I think it's funny, I'm here saying, hey, they got the Shaw brothers, great move. Honestly, for all the martial art people watching this movie, the hand-to-hand combat sequences, pretty basic. And my favorite part is the fact that all of the British actors and actresses, especially like the woman who is financing this expedition, they kind of have the Batman 66 role, like the celebrity villains in Batman 66. Their jobs were to react to the fighting. That's basically what they were doing. Van Helsing's son, I don't know his name. I'm going to call him Van Helsing Jr. Van Helsing Jr. gets involved in the fighting a lot. And he always gets beaten up. That's kind of the reoccurring thing. Apparently, British people can't fight, which we kind of knew. But the thing I did, yeah, but the thing I did like about this, Christian, is that what they do to kind of save the combat a little bit is that the brothers and sister all have melee weapons. Someone's got a bow and arrow. There's a couple spears, a couple axes, a couple swords. I really like that, and I think that kind of saved the combat a little bit for me here.
Yeah, this is not your typical martial arts fare as far as hand to hand for the most part. I mean, yeah, not to say that any martial arts movie is discredited the moment a weapon comes into play, as we've seen multiple times over, it can happen. But for this, it is enhanced by the fact that they take on these different weapons to fight against these vampiric threats and their minions and everything like that.
So this put me on this whole like deep dive as I'm watching this of melee weapons. I got really into melee weapons while I was watching this. And go figure, Wikipedia has an entire list, because of course they do, of all the melee weapons. So Christian, I want to know, you're not fighting vampires. I'll set the bar there, okay?
Okay.
If you were to train in some sort of a melee weapon, okay? Short range weapon, what would be your go-to? I can
That's an excellent question. Narrow it for me, please.
Sure. So I will some of the typical ones are like knives. It depends on like how traditional you want to be versus how versatile. So there's all the different kind of knives, short bladed objects like a hatchet would count as well. Anything in the heavy blunt object category, brass knuckles come up there, axes with the um there's even a sporting goods section in on the article, so that was like a baseball bat, pool cue, paintball marker, which I don't know if that's for shooting or for hitting.
Huh.
But
I mean, yeah.
those were some of the options.
Okay. Normally, I'd prefer to have as much distance between me and the target as possible, but for the sake of, getting into the nitty gritty, just give me those brass knuckles. Let's get up close and personal. Let's make it to the point where I have to hit you in the face. You have to hit me in the face. Let's get into this brawl, and we're not going to look pretty by the end of it.
Sounds like Christian is the guy to get in a bar fight if on your side. Yeah, I do like the brass knuckles idea. The knuckle dusters. Did you know that was the professional name
No.
for brass knuckles? It's the dumbest name I've ever heard. But knuckle dusters. Um, for me, I was thinking more based off of my fighting style, knife, some kind of short bladed object. I'm not going to spend forever trying to decide what kind of a knife I would want to use, but probably some kind of like, maybe a switchblade. Switchblades are cool. Or a hatchet. I've got some trees in my backyard now, and I may have started just throwing my hatchet when I should be doing yard work. Um, but
Mountain Man Brandon taking down the trees.
well, everybody loves Braveheart, but I love The Patriot. The very first time Mel Gibson throws that tomahawk, I'm like, yep, sign me up. I don't know
Yeah.
what I need to learn, but sign me up for that one.
I watched that movie too young.
I was actually in college by the time I had saw that one. I think I saw Braveheart right around the same time too. I did like a bunch of those right in a row when I was in college. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Christian, I told you this before we recorded. Listeners, if you're dropping in for the first time, here on Kung Fu Pizza Party, along with delivering high flying action in 30 minutes or less, which we are coming up on here pretty soon, we're also serving up wisdom one slice at a time, looking for those moments of thoughtful reflection from these films. This was the first film here on the show. I got nothing. They did not really throw me anything to work with here, hardly at all. But there was this one line, and that was the one I opened here at the beginning of the show. It is Van Helsing Jr. is talking to the woman who's financing this expedition. It's right near the beginning of the movie, and she says how big of a fan she is of his dad and how he captures vampires. And he says this line of, "I'm afraid you don't capture vampires." Why not?
I mean, the smart thing to do is get rid of them. So yeah, sure. There's an argument to be made of we should scientifically study these things so that maybe we can develop a cure or maybe we can figure out other ways that are effective to kill them or keep them in place. But I mean, at the end of the day, isn't the simpler option just to gank them?
I mean, that is usually the simpler option, but it did kind of get me of like, why? But like, why? I don't think I've ever seen that. Have you ever seen a movie where they just capture one? I don't know if I've ever seen a movie where they just capture a vampire. We're always just going straight to stabbing them in the heart with a stake.
In one of the segments, I think it's VHS 94. There's a segment because there's different found footage films inside of the film where this kind of alt-right paramilitary organization has captured a vampire and are utilizing it for like terrorist bombings and stuff like that because vampire blood explodes in sunlight, so they're using that for like their weapons, and like the big gist of the film is the vampire escapes and they have to like fight it off, and it's a lot of good times watching people die who probably should be dead.
I like how vampire blood explodes and doesn't make their skin sparkle in this movie. That seems better. Um, for some reason, I like that more. Okay, I haven't seen VHS 94, so I'll have to go check that one out. The only one I could really think of is in Morbius. He's basically experimenting on himself.
Yeah.
Why is it that whenever somebody brings up Morbius, the other person laughs? Anyway.
Because that thing made more $1 billion at the box office, and we should all be appreciative of that fact.
True. That is very true. I don't know how I would capture a vampire. How would you go about doing that? Because I've seen the memes that are like, if you put holy water in a humidifier, you've made a gas chamber for vampires, and it's supposed to be like somebody talking to like the cashier at Wendy's or something. Um, I'm trying to think how you would even go about capturing.
I mean, it kind of depends on what are the rules. I mean, what are they weak against in this film? Are they actually weak against garlic, or like every other film in the modern era, say, oh, that's just a myth? Or are they weak against silver, or is that just werewolves? Are holy symbols effective? Which holy symbols are effective? Do you have to have faith in those things to actually make them effective? So, assuming one of those things is working, I mean, I guess I'd use someone as bait and get them into like a silver cage or something that has an exit for the person who's being used as bait, but the vampire themselves can't get out. Or maybe it's covered in garlic or holy symbols or what have you, something that makes it where they can't get out, and that's for the best, but we can keep them in there and study.
I'm trying to come up with the contrived way that you would keep, is it just simply the fact that in some cases a vampire cannot enter a space unless they are invited. So do you make it look like a room, like on the outside, like you can go out this door but they can't go out because you haven't invited them out? That would be so simple of a way to trap a vampire. I like the silver cage though. That's a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, once again, I guess it depends on how the rules work. Like, are invitations something that work in this reality? Is a threshold a part of the magic system of this world where you have to ask to get in, or is it one of those things where you lose power if you don't, but you can step over it? Who knows? I guess if we're making this system, we have to figure that out. So I don't know. What do you think?
The other factor to take into consideration is the fact that in this movie, we have kind of a variation of Jiangxi. So hopping vampires from Chinese folklore. The Jiangxi in this movie are kind of like the movie itself, 90% Western, 10% authentic. Um, because they do hop, and then the rest is just a normal vampire. I do think they do suck chi energy, though. I don't think it's blood.
Yep,
Um, I
that
don't
sounds
know.
familiar because that's what Jiangxi are better at doing because they're not
Yes,
blood suckers.
correct. The energy vampire from What We Do in the Shadows is like closer related to them than
Yes.
than Western vampires. I don't know if the threshold thing. I don't know if that is part of their lore though. I've looked into for the episode on rigor mortis, which by the way, for those of you who like lighthearted horror, this is the one for you, not rigor mortis. Don't do that one. Super dark. Um but when I was researching them for rigor mortis, I don't remember seeing anything about being, you have to ask permission to pass through a threshold, or silver. I don't remember anything about silver either.
No. Yeah. They don't really have like typical vampire weaknesses, of course, being, not Western in origin. So there's going to be differences in the folklore. But Jiangxi aren't exactly my forte, so I don't know.
They I do remember it's Taoist symbolism is the thing that weakens
Okay.
them, not Christian symbols, which Peter Cushing does mention in this movie. I think he may say Buddhist symbols. I can't remember exactly, but they're not trying to hold up a crucifix. That I do remember. And according to rigor
That's
mortis,
ballpark.
ballpark, right? Um, and according to rigor mortis and the internet, sticky rice, not garlic, sticky rice is something that they don't like.
Yeah. Isn't Well, I think this might be across all vampire folklore, but isn't it if you like drop like a jar of pennies or rice on the floor, they have the instinct to actually they have to count it. It's like a compulsion.
Yes, that is that is a universal thing, is that if it's like small objects that are dropped on the floor, they have to stop and count every single one. So lucky for us, you know, Legos are abundant. Just constantly have Legos on the floor because not only will they have to stop and count them, they will step on them. And that no one's immune to that.
Now we've got a perfect way to capture them. We have our little Scooby Doo trap right above them, and we drop a jar of quarters or what have you, pennies on the ground, and while they're counting them, the trap falls right on top of them, and we've got them.
There we go. We did it. We figured it out,
It's
folks.
foolproof.
It's foolproof. Mirrors too with the Jiangxi mirrors. It's not like in the West where they can't see the reflection. They're actually like terrified of their reflection, if I remember right. So you could have some mirrors involved in the trap too to kind of keep them like paralyzed and in a certain area so you can watch, experiment, whatever evil thing we're trying to do.
Yeah. Okay.
So Christian, as
So let's
we
do it.
all right, we got it. We have, maybe Christian and I should do a whole episode talking about martial art horror movies. Maybe we should run it back sometime and do that one. Christian, before we wrap this episode up, because our time is quickly running down here, any final thoughts? Oh, you know what? I know what you got to tell me. Here on Kung Fu Pizza Party, we don't do reviews like other shows. I don't.
Yes.
5-star ratings, 1 to 10, too arbitrary, and I hate 1 to 10.
Those
It's
are
too
for
many
chumps.
numbers. That's for chumps. That's for Rotten Tomatoes. So, 2 questions: would you watch this again, and would you buy a physical media copy of this movie? Keeping in mind that there are original VHS tapes on Amazon going for about $70. I'm not kidding.
Yeah. Absolutely yes, and absolutely yes. This would make my complexion. Gosh, I was trying to think of the Little Mermaid quote, and I collection complete. And yeah, I'd love it.
I would definitely
It would
watch.
be.
Yeah, I would definitely
Go
watch
ahead.
this one again. This was a lot of fun. Uh, Kind of a good, uh, just like spooky season movie. Really, for the most part, outside of the unnecessary topless women, because it's a movie from the 70s.
Oh
It
yeah.
would be a pretty good movie to watch with the family because even the violence isn't that bad, like gore level wise. You just have to fast forward a few sequences for the young eyes. But definitely would watch this again. And you know what? If I came across it in the wild for a couple bucks at like a resale shop, like a Goodwill or something, I'm definitely snagging it for my collection as well.
Sounds great.
All right, Christian, this has been a lot of fun hanging out with you and talking about this wacky movie that we just made so much wackier trying to capture one of these things now. Listeners, if you want to check out Why I Don't Like, I will throw a link to the show in the description of this episode, along with the link to The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires for you all to check out. But until next time, thank you all for listening. We'll see you back here next week for another episode. This has been Kung Fu Pizza Party, where we've been delivering high flying action in 30 minutes or less and serving up wisdom one slice at a time. Welcome to my dojo. This is Kung Fu Pizza Party, and I'm your host, Brandon Knight. And yes, producer Cooper is here next to me, trying to tickle me, trying to use his own style of tickle foo to bring me down and take over the show. We got a fun episode for you all here today. Topical conversation spinning off from the last time he was here. Christian Ashley is back. We're pitching our own kung fu horror movies in today's episode. Last time on the show, we were reviewing The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, and we got all sidetracked on how in the world do you even try to capture a vampire. So we're gonna see. We're gonna see what other fun horror movie, kung fu movie ideas we've got here today. But Christian, welcome back. I feel like I just saw you.
Oh yeah. Wasn't that long ago.
I don't know if I'll release the video edit of this or not, but I probably should have changed shirts or something so that way people don't know we just recorded these back to back, even though they're coming out a month apart from each other. Hey, everybody. Welcome to
Yeah.
Behind the Curtain. So, Christian, I didn't give you a lot of ground rules here because it's more fun just to let our imaginations run wild. But just for the listeners at home, like I said, we are going to spend the next 20, 30 minutes, whatever it takes, to just kind of throw out our own ideas for our own movies that bring together horror and kung fu, and trying to, at least with my picks, trying not to do vampires or Jiangxi, because that is, if it's going to be horror kung fu, it is going to be that. There are some exceptions here and there, but that is usually because of the popularity of the genre in the 80s. That's usually what is done. So, Christian, are you ready? Do you want to go first here with your pick?
Okay. Yeah, sure. I'll do it. I'll start off as strong as possible. So my basic idea is we do Journey to the West. Sun Wukong is our protag, but we ramp up the horrific side of things and just have him go to town on all the mystical beasties he has to fight in the original story. And we do multiple films. We'll start a franchise.
Christian is always good for starting a franchise. Over on my sister podcast, My Seminary Life, he came on to do both. We did both 300 movies, two different episodes, and I, at the end of Rise of an Empire, I talked about how Zack Snyder has like the rights back and he could start doing a whole universe, and Christian is like all for it, just like a whole, because that's what we do. We make a whole cinematic universe out of things. So how many movies are we talking here? Like five, six? How many?
But Journey to the West is so long. I mean, it really kind of depends on what you want to focus on. You could easily do 5 or 6. I mean, if you want to really not, hobbit it up, you could do 4 or 3. Uh, but yeah, we can make it work. Just the ridiculousness is what Sun Wukong goes through. We have the origin story of why he gets trapped in the first place, and that could have horrific elements. And then we can actually go into the mystic beasties that he fights along the way. Yeah, we've got plenty of films to make from this.
You know, another one. This isn't one of my picks, but another one that we could probably stretch into like easily a whole entire streaming series, but maybe a couple films. Seven Samurai, because that movie is so dang long. I feel like you could really expand things on top of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh no, that'd be great.
We'd
And
absolutely ruin it.
yeah,
We'd absolutely ruin an absolute classic, but
I mean, that's more my forte than Chinese mythology because I know a little more about yokai and the like from Japan, from that side of things. So I'd be a better writer for that. I mean, this would force me to do more work, and I'm not opposed to that, to do Sun Wukong. But yeah, Japanese mythology and folklore, I'm down for it.
well, maybe I should throw you my first pick because it actually is samurai. So when it comes to horror, I'm a big slasher fan. I like slasher movies. I have two horror movie ideas I want to pitch, and both of them are slashers. And for this one, it is set in that like feudal Japan during the time of the samurai, and you have basically a samurai serial killer. Not that it's someone going around killing samurai, but it is a ronin going around terrorizing villages, kind of doing more like random acts of violence than like specific targeting or anything like that. The current village has to go find a samurai to track down this ronin. He ends up killing. He ends up killing that serial killer Ronin. But the twist in the horror movie part is that this is actually it's kind of like Highlander, where there can only be one. Basically, if you kill this guy, you have to become the next one. This is, maybe you could even add a layer of like, these are samurai who will not do the ceremonial suicide harikiri on themselves, so instead they choose this path to lead to their death. Um, and that, the best part about that, because this came up in the review of Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, now you don't have to contrive a way to bring the bad guy back. You've created a legacy character for the next 19 sequels. Not that it's that good of an idea, but it's a horror movie. It has to have a minimum of 6.
Like these are perfect for a low budget film. You know, film for like $10 to $15 million and make a return investment of like 50 to 75, and a franchise just keeps going and going. Like, no, I love the idea, especially, I mean, because the idea, just in general with the revenge, getting away from the goofiness of what we discussed, of how it propagates itself and keeps going. And like, yeah, maybe you just want this samurai dead until you realize what it's going to cost you. And is revenge worth it? Is it worth becoming the thing you just tried to destroy? I like the idea behind that because your protagonists can be way different for each of these different films, and like what their motivations are for going after our vengeful samurai revenant.
By the way, Christian is an author. He's a podcaster and an author. So if he's like, if his creative juices are starting to go on an idea, I'm going to trust him on it. I also really like this idea because rather than, the stereotypical horror movie trope of the sequel is the first one, but again, now you're forced to try to come up with a way. Now the viewer knows, okay, when the protagonist kills the bad guy, they have to become the bad guy. So now you have to do that part differently in every movie rather than, okay, how are we going to kill the bad guy in this one?
Yes. I mean, it's way different than just having your Jason Voorhees and Mike Myers coming back because it's going to be different every single film, unless our protagonist fails at some point in time and the killer from that film stays on to the next one.
That's also a possibility. We can write the rules on this one. That's the other exciting thing is that I don't know of a horror franchise that actually has gone this route. I mean, technically, Ghostface is a legacy character, but
Yeah.
but
But you don't kill
even
Ghostface
at
to become
that,
Ghostface.
right? That's the big twist. I'm glad it works. What other? Do you have any other ideas? Let me hear some more from you.
I mean, if we're opening up to both of these, uh, China and Japan, I mean, I got plenty because, I mean, just yokai
Okay.
in general are very fascinating. But you've got your kitsune, and they are your nine-tailed fox, kind of trickster spirits. So you can have a film where they serve as kind of our Michael Myers or what have you, our slasher, and that maybe someone stumbles onto one of their shrines and messes it up. I mean, it could be really any yokai if you really wanted it to, but that's a more recognizable one. And they're known for shape shifting to other people, so there'd be that huge paranoia as well, being like, okay, we're organizing the plan to kill this thing, but is it in the room with us right now? You know, Tanaka, the guy that
Gotcha.
just left
I
the room
love
to go to the
that.
bathroom, did he come back or was it the kitsune?
That I like. That throws like a whole, yeah. I'm not as familiar. Like I researched the Jiangxi for Rigor Mortis and Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. Outside of that, I'm not as familiar with um, Asian folklore. So I really like the shape shifting element. I think that could add a very unique element to really any kind of like horror movie, martial art horror movie um, kind of feature. Interesting. I like that. Is there any other of those creatures that you're like that you would really like to see?
If I mean, there's also the idea of not even just setting it up as the creature as the enemy. It's more the enemy and the fact that you need something from it. So there's plenty of things you can go with. The Chinese phoenix. You can go with or one of the many different forms of dragons that they have, and like you need a special scale from it. And it's the only way to heal, your mother's illness or your brother's on his deathbed or something, and you organize a group of people to go fight against it. But then it becomes that journey of we can fight against it, but like, Are we in the wrong for doing so? We are fighting this majestic creature, or is it evil itself? Like there's plenty of things you can go that route of. There is something that only this creature can provide, only something that it can provide, and what is it going to cost us to get there so that we can, I don't know, heal mom from wasting away disease of the film or whatever it is.
I do like this reoccurring theme we keep coming up with of what is the cost? Are you willing to pay that cost? I mean, that's a pretty typical like horror trope, especially when you get into like Lovecraftian horror or anything that's like, sell your soul to the devil kind of thing. Once you start dabbling in God's domain kind of stuff, what are you willing to risk, and is the cost worth what you're gonna get out of it, especially if it's this kind of like get the scale and grandma gets cured of cancer kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, in that we have like an incredibly disciplined system, like our different martial arts or our Bushido code or something like that, where you're supposed to follow these rules and you're supposed to be everything you're about is to be noble, is to seek after these things, is to not use your weapons for murder, is only for self-defense or your fists for that. And yet you're forced into a scenario where it goes against everything you've held as a principle. And so I find that very fascinating as an idea that could be utilized in a film like this.
To add another element, obviously they worked by a code of honor. There is a code here, but ninja got to operate very differently than samurai. Bushido code was very strict, very rigid. Um, Ninja kind of got to play by their own rules, and obviously, in film, ninjas are these people who are flying or jumping around, doing all this like incredible acrobatics, sneaking around. So you could almost do like a team scenario. You got some kind of like ninja team going to pull off some like heist situation, and it unlocks a spirit that is now hunting them down.
Mm. Oh, that'd be great. Then, of course, there's always a possession film of sorts where maybe an old master is killed on his deathbed, or uh, a young student is killed before they could be in their prime, and they come back to possess someone else and achieve what they couldn't in their past life. And that being like the premise of, well, why weren't they able to do it? What caused them to be unable to reach the pinnacle of where they wanted to be? Or are they seeking former glories by possessing someone else?
I like that possessing someone else to achieve your former glory that you didn't get element. I really like that because then you could do everybody's favorite, some kind of game of death style, like fighting various different opponents tournament thing. We all drool over that. We love those kind of things.
Yes.
Blood sport, every blood sport kind of thing. Um, so that would be interesting of like this person is possessed. Jean Claude Van Damme is possessed by the spirit of somebody who like died earlier in life. Like who actually won it? Who actually won?
Yeah. And then you've got it's perfect for a romance too in the film of maybe that person, was longing after someone. There was a triangle, a love triangle, and the person who's being possessed is the person who won. But there's also the duality of that spirit possessing them is there. So for your romance fanatics, you'd have that in the film too, because we got to add that, in everything else to make everything more complicated.
We didn't even talk about that in Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires, where Van Helsing Jr. like bounces back and forth between two or three girls in that movie, all very
Goodness
seriously.
gracious.
Like he has three love interests in that movie, I think.
And a ridiculous film that is totally ridiculous.
It is. It is. Speaking of ridiculous, I have a ridiculous idea I wanted to run past you. So, in the past, we have had Freddy versus Jason, Alien versus Predator. There's a rumor we're going to be getting Chucky versus Michael Myers. I don't know who asked for that one, but apparently that's a rumor. So here's the
Of the
high
century, like literally.
Here's the high level pitch: established slasher character versus established martial art character. So I've got a couple. I've got a couple. This one is the one I like the most because I think it works. It would have to be kind of like a spinoff from the main plot. Ghostface versus Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker, their Rush Hour characters. And I think it
Okay,
could work
okay.
because you've got the
Yeah.
comedic element in both, right? You have the comedic element, and maybe the contrived way to make this work is I can't think of the actress's name, but she's in Scream 4. She's the FBI agent in 6. Okay. The blonde.
Hayden Panettiere.
Can't think. Yeah. Maybe she's got a tip that Ghostface is coming back. They've already got Sidney Prescott and Jenna Ortega hidden away. And she goes to Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker to help her stop this new Ghostface before he or she gets going.
Yeah. Oh, this is ripe for a ton of things can happen here because Jackie Chan's probably never watched a horror film in his life, and then Ghostface's whole shtick is revolving around that. Whoever's under the mask, they care about horror movies, so calling him would be like one of the most awkward moments of all time because he's not going to know what they're talking about. Then you'd have Chris Tucker, who probably has seen more of these films, and he probably knows what happens to the African Americans in those films, so he's probably worried about his own status. Is he going to make it out of this film alive? And their interactions with Hayden Panettiere's character, whose name escapes me at the moment from Scream, uh, just the interactions between there would be a ton of fun, and of course there'd probably be a scene where one of the ghost faces, because there's always more than one for the most part,
Of
comes out
course, there has to be
and
more than
just
one.
yeah, just gets his butt handed to him. Like he's being all intimidating, he's coming at him with the knife, and he just beats the hell out of him.
I would love that. And I know what would be a great visual and something that I don't think has happened in a Scream movie yet is that Jackie Chan, one of his well-known things is fighting with jackets, people coming at him and he's whipping jackets around and taking it off. He could disrobe Ghostface. Like one of the Ghostface could come at him, and by the end of the fight, the person's just standing there with the mask on. The robe is somehow gone.
Yes. Oh, that'd be perfect. Because Ghostface has always been one of those characters, regardless of who's playing him, where he trips over himself, or like comical things happen. Like to have that in a comedy makes perfect sense. If we're combining our two franchises here.
Yeah, if we're gonna, I of all the ones I've got three. I've got three in total, and of the three, this is the only one that really works. Number two does not work now. It could have worked in the 90s. Chuck Norris, Walker, Texas Ranger versus Leatherface, because it would be the Texas connection, right? It
Yeah.
could work. It's the Texas connection. I do not want to see Chuck Norris now in this movie.
Well, unfortunately, he's aged a little bit. So, but yeah, in the '90s, that'd be perfect. Because Texas Chainsaw was just one of those franchises that never really got going in certain respects compared, to like a Friday the 13th. So, like to have that crossover, I think you have an effective hero to face off against Leatherface and his messed up family. So, yeah, I think that could work in the '90s, like you said.
And it would be such a dichotomy, I think that's the word I'm looking for, compared to the show Walker Texas Ranger. Like it would be
Yes,
so different to have that kind of a
yes.
movie or episode or what have you. But yeah, it can't. You're right. Texas Chainsaw Massacre never quite like got off the ground. I've seen the original. I do not care about the rest of them. I'll go out of my way to watch. I'll go out of my way to watch Jason X. The Friday the 13th sequels
Hey,
are
hey.
are horrible in an enjoyable kind of way. I want those horrible
Well,
ones.
well, you know why it's called Jason X, right? Because it's 10
Jason,
out of 10, baby.
10 out of 10. 10 out of 10 all day. The third one of these crossovers I can't get to work. So I'm interested to see how you can take it. Jigsaw versus honestly any version of Jason Statham, but specifically because he plays the same person all the time, but specifically the transporter version, because then the kidnap scene is easier because he's just giving one of the henchmen a ride and then they grab him. The problem is, so Jason Statham would work as a character. He's the right kind of like, I got this kind of person. I don't know how you do a movie that's built around torture with martial arts, because obviously you can't just do traps the whole movie, but you can't have a Saw movie without traps. Also, I don't really want to watch Jason Statham beat up an old man at the end of the movie, an old man with cancer at the end of the movie. Beating up Billy the Puppet, I will watch 45 minutes of that. Give me that. The entire movie could be, and he just like doesn't understand what the hell Billy the Puppet is, and it's just beating the crap out of him the whole time. Like that would be great, but I don't know how the rest would work.
Man, that's a tough one. I mean, I guess you could maybe have something where he's not the only person who's been kidnapped, as is kind of typical for your Saw movies anyway. But like, he has to fight his way through people, knowing that him winning removes the ability from them to actually escape. So he's gonna have to sacrifice them in order to get to Jigsaw, and that's the choice he has to make along the way. Is it worth it to do that?
Okay. So kind of like a almost like Death Race, which I'm pretty sure he was in the remake of, by the way. Kind of like a Death Race kind of thing where like innocent people are gonna have to die in order for him, or I guess it's Saw, so they're not innocent
Yeah,
in a way,
no
but
one's innocent.
right. But you know, people who are definitely not on his level as a fighter are gonna have to die in order for him to survive.
Yes.
And somehow needles are involved because there's always
You could make that work. You know, they send me the script and say, "Hey, finish this in a couple months. It's about to be filmed." I could make it work. It's probably not going to be good, but I can make it work.
are any of those good? I'm talking about Saw and
A-
Transporter. Well, you know what? The Transporter movies are kind of
After the
fun.
first movie, they're fun. After the first movie, I stopped caring because I don't like torture porn that much. Uh, and after the first film, it just gets worse. And it's not to say they're bad movies. It's just they're not for me.
Yeah, I saw the trailer recently for the original Saw, like one of those nights when I'm just street or scrolling on a streaming service and the original trailer started playing, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, we were terrified by this." Not to downplay because obviously those movies are pretty brutal, but like the quality of the film, it's an early 2000 film. It like very shows and kind of like takes you out of it a little bit now. But yeah, the whole torture porn thing is not really for me either, but I thought those characters made sense together.
Yeah, yeah, we can make it work.
Are there any others, either of these like franchise smash ups or any other horror folklore you would want to maybe bring together? Or is it time to start bringing this episode in for a landing?
Can we make a Gremlins film? We got the Mogwai there. Their interpretation of Mogwai.
Oh my gosh,
So
that makes so much sense.
I don't know what happens. I just had the thought off the beaten path. But yeah, we could make that work.
And absolutely, because that's like everybody's thing now is taking innocent childhood things that we love and making Winnie the Pooh blood and honey out of it. Like you
Uh-huh.
could totally do like an over the top, very violent horror gremlins kind of film. I'll be mad at you, but yeah, you could do that.
I will say the second of the Blood and Honeys is better. That doesn't make it good, but it's better than the first one.
I
Even though they
have
gave it 1 out of 10.
I have never seen those. Don't appeal to me. Those like childhood movies that we there's one after there's one of Mickey now, like a Steamboat Mickey thing.
I haven't
That
seen
was
that
like
one yet.
that one didn't look
Is that
too bad, but
it's the bio fascination of it that makes me go, okay, I'll try it out.
Gotcha. I know before this was cool, someone did one of the banana splits from the 70s, that TV show, because they couldn't get the rights to Five Nights at Freddy's.
Which also wasn't too bad. I've seen a Five Nights at Freddy's movie, and I'm not a fan of the video games by any stretch of the imagination, but it was okay as a film. I need to see
That
Banana Splits too. That's on my list.
that one I will watch. The Five Nights at Freddy's. That one I might check out because that's a Blumhouse, and those are usually a slam dunk anyway. So, which by the way, this episode's coming out like right before Christmas. Merry Christmas, Kung Fu Pizza Party listeners. We do have, I don't have my schedule in front of me right now, but if I remember correctly, next week's episode is going to be a martial art Christmas movie. Those do exist, so we got that for you. Or maybe it was last week. I don't remember. My schedule's not in front of me, but I think it's next week's episode. So I'll make it up to you then. And I promise, listeners, we're done with the martial art stuff, or not the martial art stuff. We're done with the horror stuff for a while now. I know I've been stretching this out a little bit, but we'll be moving on to other things, especially into the new year, because there's a certain very beloved karate franchise getting a new movie in 2025, and maybe I should talk about all of the movies, including the crappy ones. So all right.
Sounds like a fun idea.
I think it'll be a great one. Well, Christian, that's about all the time we got for today's episode. Thank you again for dropping in. If you want to, listeners, if you want to check out any of Christian's podcasts, you can check out the description of this episode because it's got all the links to all of the Anazao Ministries Podcast Network shows. This has been Kung Fu Pizza Party, and I'm your host, Brandon Knight, reminding you as always that I almost did my other show's ending because my son's yelling at me right now. We have been delivering high-flying action in 30 minutes or less and serving up wisdom one slice at a time.